come. Okay, Havana Aguila. Okay, he was a terrible singer. He was a great musician, terrible singer always. Pardon my apologies to Bob Dylan. Yeah. He was a great musician, but yeah, always left something to be out. All right, so here's about life in early America. Thank you. Thank you. So, I don't think you see this in downtown LA or downtown New York anywhere. Right? Kids are playing. Miss Daisy, okay. Driving Miss Daisy crazy. Okay. So anyway, come here. Look at this. I don't, like I said, you don't see this today, even in the worst place in downtown. Kids are playing on the street, and there's a dead horse. He's left there to rot because there's no garbage system to pick up the rot. That's 1905, I think. And here's a description of life, home life in that period. Now, okay. Home life in that period for new immigrants. A typical flat, two-room apartment on Allen Street in New York. You have two parents, 6 children, 6 boarders. So in one case, the father was a cantor, so the flat was also synagogue on Saturday mornings. During the week, it was a workshop for 2 dressmaker daughters and a shoe repair shop for the cobbler, who's one of the boarders. As the boarder describes it, the cantor rehearses, the tram passes by, the shoemaker bangs, 10 brats run like goats, the wife putters in the kosher restaurant, and at night we try to sleep in the 2 rooms. That's typical home life. There are even such jaundice stories as this one in the Yiddish press as follows. Lithuanian Jew looks for a girl, marries a girl for her money. At 1 o'clock, they're married. In the evening, 2 renters, little rooms are rented. On the following day, furniture is purchased. In the evening, the couple already have 3 boarders and 3 boardicas, male and female boarders. On the 3rd day, the husband goes back to work and the wife runs off with one of the boarders. That's life. All right. Tough life. Okay, look at this. Let's have the streets are like with gold. Where's the gold? Here's a typical tenement building. You can see the laundry on the porch. All right. Tough life. Here, a workshop, but cigar maker. This one's Bohemian, right? Because we have many immigrants coming into the United States, all over Europe, primarily Europe, but East Europe and Central Europe. Bohemian cigar maker in the tenement. He had to work there and sleep there as well. 1890. Here. Poverty Gap, they call this area, West 28th Street. Here, an English poll worker. Right? So even the English had their poor. They came here for better circumstances. This is 1898, I think. Yeah, from this period. Right. Yeah, now here, another one, 1880s. This is already a better established family. Why? I'm looking because they have some dishes on the shelf. It's sort of clean. 4 family, 1-room tenement apartment, New York, 1880s. Right? Kids' beds, the parents' bed, some kind of machinery, maybe clothing, tailor's machinery. So, and look, the story about the woman running off with the boarders may be funny, but it's a reality. It's a tragic reality. The American experience was very demoralizing on the Jewish community in those years. Very demoralizing. Because we had crime, wife desertion, juvenile delinquency, gangsters, and even what we call loose women, Allen Street, Houston, or Delancey. Houston, not Houston Street, but Houston, Delancey. At that time, anything was better than right. That's a good question. The immediate, maybe not, but they knew that it would be. Whereas in Russia, it would not be. That's the difference. So women were applying this trades even at the steps of the synagogue. The forwards, the Yiddish newspaper would describe it. The windows of some shops, you could see human flesh instead of shoes. Human flesh instead of shoes. There were so-called dancing academies advertising in Yiddish papers. Those were the call girls. Muckraking journalists of the period were excited to find evidence of a white slave trade run by Jews. There was a famous book by Polly Adler, The Madam. House is not a home. right? And she ran a brothel. And she wrote her autobiography in 1953, was a bestseller. Major site of New York City underworld activities from the 20s to the 40s, right? Even as we're coming into better times, the middle of the 20th century. Lexington House of Prostitution was a social club for New York's gangsters. A variety of other celebrities, including Robert Benchley's friend Dorothy Parker, right? She was the advice columnist or gossip columnist. It made Adler's name synonymous with sin. Okay. Now, see, when we talk about East Europe, to a great extent, a lot of these were going on, this kind of destruction of the old Jewish world was going on in East Europe. We have, for example, the play by Sholem Ash, God of Revenge, quotes from the Puma, where the pious man has a synagogue on the first floor, on the second floor is a brothel. It was remade as a play not recently, many years ago, a little bit made contemporary. Oh, in East Europe, a famous series of stories by one of the great writers of Russia, Isaac Babel, Jewish writer, short story series, and the famous character Ben Creek, King of Odessa. So it's going on. This is happening. Also in North Africa, in the Middle East, it is happening as conditions going up and down with the whims of the governments. Where Jews sometimes have benefits, sometimes benefits taken away. So you have some of this also taking place. Yeah. Immigrants always will be. Why immigrants brought in? Immigrants are brought in to do the work that the residents don't want to do. That's why Europe is aflame, because they brought in immigrants thinking they would have them do the dirty work for them, then they have no jobs for them, and they blow up. And all the riots are being run by the drug cartels there in France now. They just discovered they stopped the riots now. Who stopped the riots? The drug cartels, because they were losing business. The riots just stopped suddenly. So these are problems of immigrants, yes.
There is also a famous writer, HTBE.
Yeah.
And there is a story about that the Litvakians didn't believe that
Yeah, you have to have it. Yeah. Another topic. So we have the Jewish mafia, names like Joseph Klein or Charlie Jacoby, right? You don't need drug cartels then. You have heavily alcohol cartels in those years also. Good Jewish names, Bugsy Siegel, Meir Lansky, the founders of Murder Incorporated, which was an example of cooperation across ethnic lines, Jews and Italians in that case. We know that I officiated the funeral of the attorney that served Al Capone in one of his cases and buried right next to Bugsy Siegel over his home of peace. Not the home of peace, Hollywood forever. Oh, okay. That is, when did that one come out? That was, yeah. In the rabbit, you come across all sorts of characters. So I had to help somebody who was involved in the Israeli mafia, when I actually had an incident with the member of Russia, real Russian mafia. Okay, so smart ones knew how to get out of business in time, like the father of a previous member of a previous congregation of mine. The father decided he was going to go head-to-head against Al Capone, then realized it was a dead-end game, literally. Left, went to legitimate ventures, built a successful scrap metal business. That was that business. Yeah, that's the real world. Okay, so just as a little touting our own horns, it was Hollywood Bethel's own past president, Edward G. Robbins, who played that Al Capone character, Little Caesar. Okay, there we go. There you see. Very, very, right. Yeah. He was very Jewish, very Jewish. He would look for a minion wherever he went. Yeah. He also donated the synagogue and the House On-American Activities Committee, and called him on the carpet because he was involved, like all of Hollywood, in trying to identify who was a communist. So he had to show who was he donating to, and it shows Hollywood Temple Bethel among the recipients of the donation. So, of course, the Factor building, now it's Lehman Hall, the next building over. Also known as Jake the Barber, mastermind finagler, owner of the Stardust Casino in Vegas. Remember, that was the Paramount Casino at one time. Later cleaned up his reputation with the big donation to JFK. He paid for the pigs invasion. He paid for the building of city right now, even Holt. Also, generous developer of churches, gyms, and parks for LA's impoverished Black neighborhoods. There was a period where Blacks and Jews were very closely intertwined in many, many ways, many positive ways. We'll talk about music, for example, and other areas, but also in contracted day-to-day connections. Okay, here's a typical gang. Then there's a Jewish gang, short-tail gang. Corlears hooked under the pier at the foot of Jackson Street, 1887, because they wearing nice hats. Right? They don't dress sloppy. Well, what do we get? Slum living breeds juvenile delinquency, and Jews no exception. 1906, 30% of all children in juvenile court were Jewish. As the Yiddish press phrased it, home life was unbearable, and escaping such home life, the delinquent could enter more sophisticated crimes. Very often, that is, for a young kid, the only way out of extreme poverty. And that continues. Okay, street children sleeping, 1890, the tenement basement, sub basement. Here, the boys learning how to pickpocket, demonstrating how to pickpocket, right? How they rob people who've passed out. You got the drunk, you just go through his pockets. Okay, we've got characters like Arnold Rothstein, who fixed the 1990 World Series, right? And his main claim to fame was he transformed thuggery into an organized business, like a corporation. Isaac Zucker ran a Jewish arson ring, and you could run an academy for cooks run by Mother Mandelbaum, school for burglary, safe cracking, blackmailing, confiscation. Now, truth is that most Jews were able to steer clear of this life of gangsters and crime, but it did take their toll, this new American experience, to the soul on their Jewishness, the Jewish traditions. My father told me of a legend that deep under Ellis Island lay hundreds and hundreds of tefillin the Jews threw overboard, as they realized that this was a country where they no longer had to be bound literally by the tefillin or bound by any Jewish obligations. That's an exaggeration, but it is a symbolic story. Life in this new country did put an end to the kind of devotion the Jews had brought with them. Keep in mind, these coming here were not the ultra-Orthodox, as we think of today. That's a later wave. They were not the most observant of the Jews. They were traditional. They were traditional Jews. Some were Orthodox, others more traditionalist in behavior. Hasidic is later, much later. Hasidic is World War II. Yeah. 1880s, 1890s, mostly just the middle Jewish. You may have had some, but it's not the big Hasidic. That's World War II. So before when they could, and afterwards when they were whatever was the they could do. Yeah. Jews who were very, very devout tried to stay put as much as they could. So here, they did try to keep some observances. You have your Jewish immigrants carrying packages of matzahs, 1908. Right? So, and they did not throw away the Jewish wrapping. No, they kept it, but they just weren't quite as devout as they would have been. And New World did its job on that. One of the great classics of the period was the rise of David Lubinsky, the founder of the Forward Yiddish newspaper. Now it's in English online style. Abraham Cahan. So he described in great literary detail how a promising yeshiva succumbs to the temptations of American life. And it's worth reading. It's a very, very well written novel. He becomes a big businessman, but he loses his soul in the process. So how did the children and grandchildren of these greenhorns climb out of the mud? That's the big question. So you do what Jews in time of poverty did. You do Luftgeschäft. You make business out of there. Whatever comes to mind, whatever comes to hand. So I'll give you an example, in case I know personally. Father led a congregation one time in a small town in the heart of West Virginia. And there was a bar mitzvah for a child. When the child came from a town that was even more isolated, an hour's drive away. The grandfather came for the service and was astonished to find a familiar face on the beam. I said, "Well, I know that man. Much older than he remembered it, but he recognized it. It was the president of the congregation. I remember him. I had him thrown in jail many years ago. What was it? The grandfather in this case had been the mayor, the judge, and police all rolled in one in this small town, very small town. Family had a lumber processing mill. And so it was the entire city. So the president had come to the town as a poor immigrant from Lithuania, had been peddling from door to door. But he didn't have a license to peddle from door to door. The sheriff, judge arrested him, put him in jail for the night. Right? So from peddling door to door without a license, this greenhorn managed to start a scrap metal yard. By the time I was there, my father was the rabbi and I'd come to stay with him, live there. He had become what Jews would say comfortable. How you doing? I'm comfortable. Here's my yacht, here's my mansion, I'm comfortable. You know? So comfortable. A major Jewish philanthropy sent its top operator, an old friend of my father's. He'd been the special advisor for Jewish affairs to the American military government in West Germany. Very top figure. To this isolated town to ask for a major donation to build a school in Israel. Right? From a guy arrested for peddling without license. Okay, so how do you do? Food vendor sells his wares on the streets of Lower East Side. I don't know if he became a millionaire from selling bagels, but pretzels, but yeah, you do what you can. Try to do it legitimately, the best you can. I hear a street peddler, you move a step up, you got a little cart with wheels and you pull it by hand. 1890s. You open a sweatshop, right? In your apartment, 1890, here's a sweatshop on Ludlow Street. Right? You use your skills from the old world as a Schneider, for example, a tailor. But Jews have that practice, so it's a usable skill. And they did have reading skills. Keep that in mind. Even if it was Yiddish. But from Yiddish, they could read the Yiddish papers in America. The Yiddish papers in America, like the forwards, were great vehicles to introduce what was American life to them. So they could use that to get ahead also. There was the forwards, there was the Allgemeine Journal. Yeah. And so a greenhorn learned what it meant to be a Yankee, right, from the Yiddish paper. So you would read something like a daily column in the Yiddish forwards, the Brintel brief, a little tiny bundle of news or letters. And they would, it's like, Dear Abby, questions, told you do this, you do this.
If that lesson.
Yeah.
If that lesson, grandfather, he used to go and pedal.
Yeah.
So that's.
That's how you start. So another thought, Jews are very active in organization for rights, labor rights, right? If you look on the old Yiddish forwards, it had in the Yiddish Karl Marx's slogan, Arbeiter von allen Ländervereinigen sich, workers of all lands unite. Right? It was a voice of poor workers organizing and gaining the upper hand against oppressive employers in the early years of unionization. So this is a fellow, a Jew like Samuel Gompers, who went from cigar maker, the head of the Cigar Makers Union, to be the founder of the American Federation of Labor, which would later merge with the CIO, become FLCIO. And by the way, the union, idea of unions in America different from those in Europe. It says, the union, yes, socialism, no. They did not adopt socialism per se as a position. And it remained true of American labor movements over the decades, unlike the European movements. They decided not to kill the goose that lays the golden egg, but just get a bigger piece of the egg. That was their strategy. And then you have your picture of kids, garment worker kids. That was a very big thing. The famous fire in a garment factory trying to short waist. Yeah, the doors were locked and kids were jumping out of the windows. Right. Right. Very important. Right. So it has in Yiddish something schlaffer, right? Abolish slavery, child labor. So here's the forwards, Yiddish paper. I was trying to find a copy. They're pushing Roosevelt, labor's choice, the Arbeiters Auswahl. And what they pointed out in the commentary about is they're moving from democratic socialist to social democratic position. What does it mean? Social democrat. democracy with social benefits for the people, the working class. And then also, what else helped? It was organization, right? Skills. It was also the fellow German Jews who had become so successful, who were embarrassed by their green brothers and sisters. They were embarrassed. It was an existential threat to them, because they had made it up to the top. And here, your friend in the country club says, "Look at this fucker here, this greenhorn. He's one of you guys." Right? And this is very often true for people in other ethnic groups, where some make it up and the less successful are left behind. And in many cases, the successful just left the others to wallow in the mud, but it did not happen with the German Jews. Instead of hiding from them, they realized that the only way they could ever feel secure here in America was for their landsmen to move up the ladder as quickly as possible. And so they supported settlement houses, provide tools for advancement for newcomers, and other social services, very much actively involved in it. And also, very interestingly enough, and I remember this when I first came to the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is the conservative movement, I was surprised to find that on the walls at the entrance were the names of German Reform Jewish leaders, people who've been big donors of the German Reform movement. And here they were on the walls of the seminary, conservative, strongest supporters. And it was because they recognized that a well-educated, Americanized rabbinate that spoke to traditional Jews, not to Americanized Jews, who left everything behind, but still were traditional, that rabbi could best serve to Americanize them as well and inculcate values and guide them. That was what pushed the conservative movement and made it the premier movement. And it was this wave of East European Jews, still traditional, not Orthodox anymore, but traditional, with well-trained rabbis as their figureheads. Very important. There was also the idea of learning for its own sake. The Yiddish speaker could make sure his child mastered English and the civilization of the new land. So Jews flocked to higher education. It's like City College of New York. So you go to CCNY, City College of New York University, City College, 1920s and 30s. Jews took their place in line of immigrant communities hungering for higher education. Not only Jews, a lot of people, right? But it was known for its excellence as the proletarian Harvard and student radicalism, the Little Red Schoolhouse. It had a special meaning for an immigrant Jewish community that was denied access to the elite schools, the Protestant establishment. It was a center of leftist intellectual ferment in the 19s and 20s, and recorded in memoirs of Jewish intellectual life of that period, Irving Howe, Alfred Kazin, other notable alumni, Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, financier Bernard Baruch, medical researcher Jonas Salk, actor Edward G. Robinson, our own, Mayor Edward Koch, and General Colin Powell. He was a Yiddish speaker. I'm sure. Get that in mind. Please put in that. So Jews easily stood out. It was not, they were not liked for this. Keep that in mind. Jews were not liked for this. A writer in 1923 edition of The Nation is a liberal leftist-leaning publication historically, put it bluntly, the upwardly mobile Jew sends his children to a college a generation or two sooner than the other stocks. As a result, there are more dirty Jews and tactless Jews in college than there are dirty and tactless Italians, Armenians, or Slovaks. This is from a liberal leftist publication, The Nation. During the early 1900s, according to one observer, at every university and college I've ever visited, I've heard ungrudging praise of the exceptional ability of the Jewish, especially the Russian Jewish students. So the commentary continues, history is full of examples where one race has displaced another by underliving and overworking. Remember the people in the Charleston March? Jews will not replace us? This was the fear. That was one of the fears behind the numerous clauses in Europe. Yeah. Right. So it was an idea. It becomes a religion to replace a yeshiva study. Yes. Right. That's right. That's why. Because when you have somebody who's burning to get up and move up, then you're threatened. Then you're threatened. Right? Yeah, but we're also socially aggressive in the sense that we don't want to be stuck in the bottom. And so we'll take those skills and move up the avenues, whatever's the avenue, yeah.
I was gonna mention later, like say the 1980s, 1990s, there was also kind of anti-Asian attitude in higher universities, like you know, in America, because they wanted to live with them as well, kind of like.
We have that's the Supreme Court case. That's part of the Supreme Court case. By the way, Jews are no longer highly represented in the big schools anymore. It's because they're no longer burning to get ahead. That drive is going down. We see that in the college admissions. That's why they were not actually involved in these cases. So, yeah.
Also, where they're just
No, actually, the Jews are not a problem in the current issue. There's less of a push. It actually is less of a push. It's not necessarily because they're discriminating against Jews. There's actually a decline in intensity, and maybe just be that kids of this new generation just don't feel the burn. And I think that's part of it. Yeah. Well, that's a separate issue. Is your Harvard education worth anything? That's a different issue. I'm part of that generation that started that dumbing down of American universities. When they started in my generation, it started the idea of pass-fail classes. Oh, I don't want you to have pressure. So if you show up in the class and you pass, it's good enough. All right, that's start of it starting then. Mea culpa. So you wouldn't flunk, yeah. Then, man, it started with that, and then it continued with the idea that we wanted students to evaluate professors. And also in that period, and when you put the fox in charge of the chicken coop, right? So professors would be concerned about getting good evaluations because their advancement depended on it. Now, I mean, if you're an entertaining and good professor, okay. But what was happening then was you were bending over and catering to your client instead of, right? It's like a doctor giving the patient the drug that he wants to kill him because you want to keep on getting the patient. That's sort of the same thing. Sort of the same thing. Okay, here, just go on with this, and then we'll wrap up. So, as a Francis Russell from an old Protestant family, went to Boston Latin School, and that was the best public high school, led the students to Harvard. By 1920, became half Jewish. So he writes, my own background, middle-class Protestant, non-competitive, like that of most Roxbury Latin boys. You're in position, why burn? Why do you have to fight? You do what you have to do, and that's it. Whereas in contrast, Jews worked far into each night, their lessons next morning, letter perfect. They took obvious pride in academic success and talked about it. At the end of each year, room prizes for excellence in each subject, and they were openly after them. None of the Roxbury solidarity of the pupil versus the master. Right? And the old system, yeah, we do what we have to do. We're going to gang up on the master, so he's got to give us, right? If anyone reciting made a mistake that the master overlooked, 20 hands would shoot up into the air to bring it to his attention. All the Jewish kids. Okay, so Jews fought to excel. It was a burning hot drive at that time. They fought to overcome entrenched authorities in the major universities.
That is kind of part of the immigrant process. And so where, and if you look at any group of immigrants, when they're able to access,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
whether it be education or whatever, that burning desire to take advantage of all women instead of available
Yeah.
to excel. So, and as generations go on, because I see it even in the primitive, as the generations go on, that drops and drops and drops.
Yeah.
But
The burn
yet,
goes
but
up.
yet, in the Caribbean, it's always, there's always someone hitting you over the head, like you have, I mean, education.
Yeah.
Did I say education, yeah.
So Caribbeans who come to the United States have done very well.
Well, they've done very
Right.
well, but then you see in the children,
Hmm.
they're getting in with their pals who are out doing whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not saying all of them,
No, it's a problem, yeah.
but it's.
You get dragged down because people will drag you down.
But it's also.
Also.
The kids wanna be assimilated.
It's right.
and be
And who are you next to?
right.
And the one who's down here wants you down here. I'd say they'll drag you down.
And it's easier to.
They're
be
gonna
there.
they're gonna try to drag you down also.
Drag you down. I just think it's just
Yeah.
easier to be there.
Yeah, oh, the easy way.
And
Okay.
parents that work 3 jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, so all these immigrant groups came at the same time with all the same drive. It's just Jews made it very well. So it expressed itself in every avenue of the new Jew in America. And instead of letting the slums and tenants keep them down, they moved out with driving force. So by the latter half of the 20th century, as the United States became the preeminent leader of the Western world, and by the end of the Soviet system, the sole preeminent leader, right? It became the American century. The Jew in America were uniquely positioned to be at the core of this new America. So you have in entertainment, vaudeville, Tin Pan Alley, to Hollywood, Temple Bethel, radio, television, music, right? Irving Berlin creating Christmas music, Gershwin creating a black musical, Porgy and Bess, with Jewish cantorial themes in it, Rhapsody in Blue. Full involvement in American government, senators, cabinets, officials, so-called Jewish seat on the Supreme Court. And in literature, 20th century, Jewish American novels, Saul Bellow, J.D. Salinger, Norman Mailer, Bernard Malamud, Chaim Potok, Philip Roth. Jews were so dominant in America's writings that they were in charge. They were called the Jewish literary mafia because they controlled the publishing industry. Yeah, they controlled it. And here and there, they let a few non-Jewish novelists in. Yeah, I know Salinger, I think maybe was. Yeah. Yeah.
After World War II. The state grows really quickly. It wasn't so hard. It's a different experience for those immigrants because in one generation they were already.
Yeah, I'll talk about that one. That's the next group. That's a different wave. But the Russian wave had to really fight to get to it. Really fight. Because they came into a poor country and left it as a rich country. Right? So Jews became so prevalent at universities, we had this numerus clausus. It was to try to control how many Jews come until the Jews were too powerful and the gates were forced open. That's basically why you had 20%, 30% at these major institutions, Harvard, Yale, and so on, because they couldn't keep the Jews out of it. So now, the presidents are Jewish, right? The heads, right? So these waves of new Jews kept coming on, refreshing and replacing early waves. So what did we have in the last 3/4 of a century? We had the second wave of German Jewish intellectuals, dominated the sciences. We have the movie Oppenheimer, father of the bomb, and also Einstein, of course. Also, underappreciated, successful movie actress who on the side developed a method of frequency hopping that made American torpedoes invisible against enemy detection. I forgot what her name is. Hedy Lamarr. Brilliant genius. She listened to the Nazis talk to her husband about it, and she remembered it and understood it and went on to develop this. Then in social psychology, social work, social sciences, Viktor Frankl, Kurt Lewin, Ruth Wirth, the names goes on. And the intellectual ferment of the 60s, Hannah Arendt, Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse, the German Jewish intellectual who was supposedly the influence for the SDS and the New Left until he said, I don't like it. That's how far away they took it. And then world affairs, Henry Kissinger, right? Then we also had this wave of ultra-Orthodox Jews coming before and after the Holocaust also. Both yeshiva world, Lithuanian style, and the Hasidic Orthodox. who essentially pushed aside what had been the normative orthodoxy, or what we call modern Orthodoxy in the United States, and reinvigorated that wing of the Jewish community. And we had a second wave of Russian Jews, why do we hear? From former Soviet Union, far more educated than the Jews that came here a century ago, and produced, among other things, Google. Yeah, Sergey Brin. And Iranian Jews coming here, better off also than previous waves, brought with us such an entity as Qualcomm, computer chips, a Nazarian family project. And Israeli Jews who brought us Power Rangers and the new media moguls like Chaim Saban, as well as every other building contractor in Los Angeles. So now I'm going to leave, and we're going to close off with this, the $64,000 question. Is the American Jewish century winding down as we fear the American century has wound down? That is the great problem that remains to be seen. So I'm not going to solve that problem, just leave us with that. Oh, yeah, yeah, that branch, it's. High cost of housing, though, is a problem of Los Angeles administrators who created it, more so than the industry that, but the industry pay for these is way above the minimum wage. The problem is Los Angeles, because of Los Angeles' bad politics and planning, has no housing. So I know what the union is doing is calling for part of the negotiation to be a housing solution. If it's a good solution, I don't know. The writer's strike is a very interesting problem because they are threatened by computerization. For the first time, computerization destroyed the factory worker. Greatest cause of poverty among Blacks in the United States was the destruction of the factory system, some of it because of overseas manufacturing, some of the computerization. And it was a great sort, the wage gap was not as big in the 80s because of that as it is today. And that's the number one factor. So now the brain workers, intelligent workers, now they're going to be industrialized out. And that's a big fear on this end, right? Use of artificial intelligence for writing scripts and so on, right? Do we get too intelligent for ourselves? Am I going to be replaced? Although I've looked at what AI does, and it's not as good. Okay. So those are big issues that we will have to face in the country. Yes, no question, no question. Right, right. I've heard it. Right, right. I don't think it was great. Okay. I've tried some stuff. Yeah, go ahead. Then we'll get them.
I know you can't mention everything, but one of the subjects that we just barely touched on are how these peddlers became ultimately great departments.
Right.
Created.
Right.
Who's disproportionately represented. Even Barry Goldwater's grandfather.
Oh, it was a peddler, right.
Was.
Yeah, that was originally with the German Jewish wave of a century and a half ago, but the peddlers continuing to retail and so on. Yeah. Serious, right, right. Okay, so we'll call it then for everybody. Call it quits. We need to stop the, somebody control the screen share there. On that end, I need Carmen. Let's say goodbye. Okay, no, it has to actually stop the screen share. So we're Jeff would know. Let me see, or see if you can, Doug. You know, it's not screen share. It's the live stream. It says end meeting for all. Yeah, for all. That's it. Okay, I managed to hold up.